Yes, we are. It's okay, Anna.
Beautiful. Thank you. Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Anna, and I will be your host today on behalf of Product People. We, Product People, are a German based consultancy, and we help companies efficiently develop great products. So, how do we do that? Well, first of all, we can fill a temporary gap in a client's organization as an interim, aka freelance product manager. We can fill this need for a couple of months, half a year, or perhaps even longer if necessary. Secondly, we help our clients obtain product profitability turnaround and growth through our expertise and by offering our advisory services. And last but not least, we love to share our knowledge in the field by offering remote product management training. So, if you or anyone you know are in need of such assistance, please remember we are always happy to help. Furthermore, together with you, we conduct these weekly meetings. And today, like always, we have a guest who will talk to us about an exciting topic from the product management world, followed by a Q&A session and a friendly networking event on Zoom, to which you are all dearly invited. So today we have the pleasure of talking about the dangers of fooling ourselves with data with our guest, Chad Jennings. Chad is a VP of Product and Design at AMBOSS. So, Chad, thank you very much for joining us today. We're very excited to learn about this topic, especially since product management is so heavily reliant on data. It's crucial for us to know how to effectively use it. So, we're very much looking forward to your presentation, and please, you have the stage.
Cool. Well, hey, nice to be here. Everybody streaming and here on Zoom. Let me share and go in here and bring this up. See that okay?
Perfectly.
Great. Cool. Hey, excited to be here from talking to you from downtown Berlin, from our, strangely enough, our offices here at AMBOSS, where we're still allowed to come into as long as we wear masks. I don't normally have X-rays in my home office. Cool. So I'll dive in and kind of and start here. So there's a very story or potentially a myth that during World War II, actually about 50% of the planes that went into battle came back. So only a 50% survival rate. Of course, this is a big challenge and a problem for the Allied bombers. And they said about researching this. Okay, how can we understand if we looked at all these planes that come back, what can we learn about how we can put armor in the right place to better protect them? We can't put armor everywhere because they're going to get too heavy. So they started to look at all the planes that come back and started to see some patterns, right? They saw this pattern, and maybe you've seen this photo previously. It's a great story. They saw that all the bullet holes were either in the wings, the center gunner, or the tail. The wings, the center gunner, and the tail, over and over and over again. And they said, this is such a great insight. We know where we need to put our armor. We need to put the armor where in the wings, the center, and the tail, where these planes are getting shot at, right, and come back. Thankfully, there's a statistician named Abraham Wald that said, hey, wait a second, you're missing a big chunk of the data, right? What you're seeing is only the planes that have survived. So actually, you don't need to put the armor in where these dots are out where they're being hit. You need to put them in the exact opposite place because that's where the planes are getting shot and not surviving and falling out of the air, right? So reinforcing these areas where they were unscathed versus those that were hit that caused the plane to be lost. So ultimately, this is a good example of survivorship bias. It's where we concentrate on the people or things that make it past some selection process and overlook those that did not. Now, we kind of do this every day. We, if walking down the street and someone sees an amazing 50s car, 40s car right down the street, and someone may say, gosh, they just don't make them like they used to. And that's maybe true, but it's actually not, because we're not seeing the 99% of those cars that are actually on a trash heap somewhere that didn't survive to this point, right? So this is part of how we think about data on a regular basis. But I think it's really critical actually how we think about things from a product design point of view or a product management point of view and how we analyze data. because data-driven is a real core competence for product managers in design. It's fundamentally important. However, it's also highly biased, and most critically, it may be taking our focus away from where massive growth may lie. So I think we probably spend a majority, of 100% of our analysis and research on the data that comes in, right? But let's look at that data. So if we think about some kind of common web metrics, right, we have bounce rate. So bounce rate, if you're not familiar with it, is basically someone shows up on your homepage or any page on your site, basically throws up and leaves, then that's a bounce, right? So they aren't engaging with your site at all. So at a 45% average bounce rate means, out of 100 people, 45 people just leave. When we get on mobile, a good bounce rate is 65%, right? As we get to things like mobile apps, we see that really only about a quarter of the people that download your app are going to use it more than once. And we get to e-commerce conversion rate, so meaning someone coming to your site and actually going through and finishing a purchase process is usually around 3%. So this is a good conversion rate, right, across the board. If you look on mobile web experiences, that's usually 1.5% conversion rate. So ultimately, we have these 98.5% of non-providers, these non-customers, who actually don't show up in any of our dashboards, any of our analysis, any of our reporting on a regular basis. But we spend a majority, if not 100%, of our analysis and resources on these 3% who convert, or 1% who opt in, or 3% who actually respond to surveys. And in doing that, maybe we're perhaps blind to why these non-customers fail, while maybe breakthrough products can come from understanding the potential customers who never show up in these dashboards or models. So why do you invest so little in non-customer insights? Well, it's expensive. It's time-consuming and risky. It's resource-intensive. It's inconvenient, right? Like if I want to send a survey, it's much easier to go in and say, look, I can pull down an email list of opt-in users and email them tonight and have a survey results to provide to an executive team within a week, right? We are a business case-driven culture, right? For the most part, a lot of our executives come from marketing, operations, engineering backgrounds, where they want this hard data in front of them to really make detailed and informed decisions. But there's some other reasons we can talk through here. Ultimately, look at the data which we can easily collect, which maybe isn't necessarily the data we need, right? We have Google Analytics and Tableau, data warehouses, more data than we can ever process. And we assume the data we collect can actually easily answer all our questions, right? This is one of my favorite quotes. If you torture data long enough, it will likely confess to anything you like. And I've sat in tons of product analytics meetings with people over the years saying, look, conversion's down. If we just look hard enough, we'll find something, right? We'll figure out the silver bullet that will tell us the change we need to make it right or to increase growth. We assume that. And again, if you look long enough, you'll find something. But if we think about in general, how often new KPIs or new metrics are invented in businesses, it doesn't happen very often, right? We have many KPIs that were probably created long ago, and we continue to measure and track success of our business on those pieces. So if we think about this in the context of healthcare, so now that I've been working in healthcare for the last couple of years, you see these things pop up, of where bias introduces themselves into our data, so it not necessarily the data we need. So most of the cells and animals, human studies and medical science have mostly been male, right? It's just historical aspects, and thankfully there's a lot of investment going on to change that. But if you take what's pretty acknowledged as a pretty common recommendation, as you get older, you should take an aspirin a day, right? It's really good for your heart. And this is a well-known thing. Many doctors prescribe it. But these longitudinal studies of aging, that study that we rely on this had 22,000 men and 0 women in the study, even though we think about it as a daily basis as something that's pretty common and well understood within the medical practice. If we look more on the side of machine learning, right, and potentially AI, and of course all the data that's helped on that. Back in 2013, a handful of researchers at Google set loose a neural network on Google News, right, and the text. The goal was to look for patterns and ways words appeared in each other, and this relationship could be captured then to help train other tools, right? It was called Word2Vec, extremely powerful and used globally for machine translation and web search results for a long time. We can see what it did here. It was actually blatantly sexist. And so how this works is it has these word vectors. So Paris is to France as Tokyo is to Japan. If you ask the database, though, father to doctor is to mother is to X, it will say mother is to nurse. If you query man to computer programmer, women to homemaker comes up. So actually, researchers have now fixed this data set, but it was once biased within a company's data in the age of AI may have huge implications, especially as a lot of our data we focus on has historical data that's been there, and we've defined it and organized it in a certain way. It isn't necessarily that it's sexist, but there are some assumptions built into that that may have been assumed and built in a long time ago that maybe turns us blind to how the world really is. So data is loud. So Clayton Christensen mentioned this and coined this term. And I think back sometime when we started a company long ago, Blurb. When you're first starting this company, you don't have any users, right? You don't have any data. You go out, you talk to people. It's really rich data, this real rich context, right? We build our own problem, go out, find people, solve their problems. It's a context-rich experience. As soon as you have a product and the data starts coming in, right? You start looking at your dashboards, you fall into the crisp precision of the spreadsheet, right? And this precision can be mistaken for reality. It's human nature to study this clean data I have in front of me. It's loud, right? Like it's delivered every morning in reports from Google Analytics or reports from the data research team, right? It's always there, and I can pull it down and look at a great dashboard and potentially put it into a PowerPoint document. That quiet data, though, right? The context-rich data that's collected from people requires much more work to find in this loud room that many of us live in. So I think we know this. I mean, data is looking at the past and is limited necessarily as a predictor of the future. So we model, of course, especially in business speak, we model what we can, we model what we know, and business cases tend to illustrate growth based on these historical metrics. It may be trusted, but again, it's really limited to the data we have. So it'll always be incremental growth and limit maybe non-customer growth, which may be much larger. So for example, this time of year, a lot of us in product may be going through financial planning and forecasting for the next year. And people bring in their business cases, and there's maybe 10 or 20 of them. And on one side here, we have a business case that says, well, if we add this new feature, it will increase activation and conversion by 3%. And over time, that will equal $1 million in additional revenue. And we have high confidence in that because we've seen how this worked. Over here, we have a more innovative idea that's a bit more out there, right? That hasn't necessarily been validated with data and is higher risk and less confidence. In the end of the day, which ones of these tend to win out? Some of these do, but our portfolio tends to be extremely connected to these ones that are highly predictable and more lower risk and higher confidence, which comes from this historical data. Again, that's not a wrong thing, but how do we make sure we're balancing our portfolio of innovation to do a little bit of both on each side? So it's easy to confuse evidence with insights sometimes. What we really do is measure outcomes, and outcomes are really hard, right? And I think we talk a lot of this in product and design. We want to be outcome driven, right? What is the real outcome we're trying to measure? But it's hard, right? So in healthcare, we want to say, look, at AMBOSS, for example, we provide knowledge tools and reference tools for physicians, right? And we want to say, look, a physician that uses our tool will make better informed decisions that may impact a patient who later on in their life are less likely to potentially get cancer, right? That's a long way to track to get to that outcome. And it's hard. It takes lots of time to get that. We also understand that maybe the numbers we follow are the numbers we look at. Say the number of followers someone may have in Twitter isn't necessarily a good indicator of actual influence, right? Or if we think of LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn may say, hey, you have 900 followers or 900 connections, and hey, you got this job. But the real outcome is, did I find a job that I'm still in a year later, right? That fulfills me as a great job or not? These are outcomes that are hard to measure. So True Insight synthesizes several facts into the broader context of what we do in our business, and that drives decision-making. So I love this photo. I think it's from Tom Holm, did a presentation on desire paths, right? And I think if I remember, it's from Brazil. And what you see here, of course, is, hey, here's where the engineers and the designers thought the sidewalks and the roads should go. And you can see where people actually walk across this environment. It's just a good reflection that at some juncture, right, some person, and probably a human, made a decision of what data to collect, what not to collect, and how to present it. And we seldom necessarily question that, right? Early on, someone defines a business unit as a B2C unit and an enterprise unit, and our spreadsheets are organized that way. Therefore, we think our customers' world are organized that way. But actual customers' world is not necessarily organized at how we organize our own data. And sometimes we seldom question that. And we only get at that by looking deeply into how users or how potential customers and non-customers think about their world and identify that mismatch necessarily. It's pretty obvious, but ultimately people are messy, and decision making is messy and complex complex there too. So we a lot of times fall under this delusion of a single explanation. Hey, we launched this feature and conversion increased, therefore those two things must be aligned. But if we take something maybe as simple as a plane ticket, of course, when we used to be able to buy plane tickets and travel places, but even that decision of, what's my budget? What type of location am I going on? Do I have children? Am I visiting family? Is it for leisure? Is it for business? There's lots of complexity that comes into that decision that actually never shows up in the abandonment funnel analysis of booking.com, right? How do we capture those things and get a better understanding is key to maybe driving big growth and not just incremental growth of abandonment within a funnel. We also, I think I'm probably preaching to the choir in many places here, but in general in culture, we have this distrust of qualitative data. Somehow in our quest for confidence, qualitative knowledge ended up positioned as the opposite of quant knowledge. Indy Young said, the information architect, she said, we've all heard the word fluffy associated with qualitative knowledge. If quantitative research is seen as producing reliable, inconvertible facts, then qualitative research is seen as the opposite, the soft, made up, inapplicable knowledge. Now, I think we understand that this quote of stories are just data with soul, right? That actually qualitative research tied to quantitative research actually answers the why, right? Insights come from that balance. And I think we know this inherently when a lot of the times we spend looking at web metrics or funnel metrics. A classic web metric is a good example is something like time on page, right? So say, actually, we have lots of articles at AMBOSS and we could say, look, lots of people are spending time on this page. Therefore, I think that they must really be finding the content they need and are deeply engaged with the reading. That could be the case, or maybe they're lost, right? Maybe they're actually in another tab watching cat videos on YouTube, right? The data doesn't tell us that. We actually need to find that place and then go and talk with people and observe people and understand how they're really using our products. Quant being better is deeply embedded in our culture, and that potentially limits us. So we can agree and disagree on the points prior, but I think we can agree that a good chunk of our potential growth is not captured in a data-driven culture and approach to product where we and businesses tend to invest 95% of our resources on a day-to-day basis. I think even here, our data team has 10, 12 data scientists, right? The product analytics team is another 6. There's commercial researchers, people doing that. And even our market research tend to focus a lot on our current users that churned and pieces like that, not going out and talking really to the people who have never heard of us, right? But that's where we need to understand better. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit then about tactics, or how do we then approach this, right? So we say, all right, we agree, Chad, non-customers are important, but how do we talk to them? What are frameworks to think about it? So one of my favorite frameworks out there is Blue Ocean Strategy. It's been around for many years, but I really like to talk, I like how they categorize non-customers within that. And these tiers of non-customers. So if you think about our market, this is who we define ourselves as kind of the current people we feel we're serving well, have product market fit, we're trying to get in and optimize and grow with. These soon-to-be non-customers are really the ones that are minimally using your product, right? They're basically waiting to jump ship and leave this industry as soon as the opportunity presents itself. But locked into these first-tier non-customers are an ocean of untapped demand. They're probably really hard to get to, though, because they're not the people who come back regularly. They aren't going to answer surveys. They're not going to reach out to customer support. The second tier is refusing non-customers. So they see your current product as an option to fulfill your needs. They know I could use it, but they refuse not to. So anyone that has maybe painted a wall in their apartment or flat in the past 2 years, you're actually refusing non-customer of the wallpaper industry, right? You know that you could use wallpaper, but you've consciously chosen to paint instead of using wallpaper. Therefore, you are refusing non-customer of the wallpaper industry. And unexplored are really markets really distant from ours that are really unaware that we have a product that could serve their needs, or we need to shift how we get to them to serve their needs comfortably. And so let's talk about some examples with this to make it a little more real. Excuse me. So if we think of a traditional market like, or companies like Visa, American Express, MasterCard, these traditional big credit card companies, and we think about who their non-customers are. So one, the soon-to-be non-customers might have been these small and mid-sized merchants where it's like, ugh, installation costs, high fees, it's not really worth it for what they get out of it. For new micro businesses, and by micro businesses, it may be the person selling bread at the farmer's market, right? The person at a lemonade stand, potentially, right? It's too complex to set this up, and I don't get enough sales to make up for it in the past. And the unexplored world, maybe someone, hey, I have someone coming to maybe help clean my house, or a carpenter or a babysitter come over. I've never even thought of trying to pay them in credit card, right? I'll just run to the ATM and get cash. It really isn't even in my consideration set to give my daughter's babysitter the Visa card. Right? Of course, now comes along someone like Square a couple of years ago, and really by understanding these non-customers has built an amazing business. So for small and mid-sized merchants, like, yes, it's cheap setup and lower fees, I can do this. For a DIY business like a farmer's market or a garage sale, yeah, easy to set up even for my DIY business. I get this little thing in the mail, it's amazing. And now, even if I want to pay someone cash at home, I can say, look, I can pay my card by my phone, right? With one tap or sending them directly to that. So it just gives an example at how people use non-customers and can actually grow big businesses around that. Now, being in healthcare, how does this apply to the healthcare space? And what are different ways we can think about non-customers to drive growth and solve new problems in a different way? So a couple ideas. So if we think about traditional healthcare on the left, meaning, well, we all know it's a $1 trillion market, it's a big complex thing, but here's some examples. So if we think about soon-to-be non-customers, these are people really frustrated with the current status quo. And when we used to be able to just go to the doctors, and you're sitting in the waiting room, sometimes waiting a half an hour, waiting an hour to get seen, you're really frustrated, right? And actually, look, I can't go to the doctor until Monday morning. It's Saturday night. I need some help. I don't want to go to the emergency room, right? Is this frustration with the status quo. Of course, now, and especially in the last year, telemedicine have taken off. When I worked for Babylon Health in London, once the NHS made it possible to get refunded for telemedicine, we went from 0 users to about 80,000 and becoming the third largest private practice provider of telemedicine in the UK in about 6 months, right? That gets at the fact that here we're providing something that's pretty amazing. Hey, I can get a doctor on my phone in 10 minutes. It's 2 a.m. in the morning. My daughter's sick. I want to talk to somebody. It really serves that need that the traditional healthcare wasn't paying attention to. If we think about refusing non-customers, you may not be surprised to know that men tend to visit the doctor less than women. They're too busy. They may be afraid, right? They may be uncomfortable to ask these questions. And what we found, though, is people tend to express themselves more freely with a chatbot. So this is Wobot. It asks questions about your mood, can help with depression by running you through some cognitive behavioral therapy. But again, it's helping people that are refusing to go to the doctor actually get help in a different way and build products around that. The final one would be undiagnosed. So if we think about sleep, and of course we do it a lot, but sometimes we don't think about it enough. Insomnia and chronic insomnia is a huge problem all over the world. About 75% of moderate to severe sleep apnea, which is when you stop breathing during the night, goes undiagnosed. That's almost 20 million people in the US, and actually 90% of women with sleep apnea go undiagnosed, right? And they don't even know that they could get help in healthcare. They don't even think they understand it. They don't even know they have it, right? Now, of course, we have a lot more things that actually can track sleep in your bedroom, right? So this is like the sleep score version. I have this Aura ring that tracks my sleep every night. And all of a sudden, this data helps me understand, hey, do I have a problem with insomnia? And I can then get connected to apps that can help me through cognitive behavioral therapy or telemedicine psychology, or even introduce me to a sleep clinic where I can get help. So this is one way to think about how we may be tackling non-customers and understanding them can be a really powerful way to grow our problem. And one final one, I think, getting people to participate in clinical studies is really hard, especially if perhaps you have rare diseases and people like that. And pharmaceutical companies pay lots of money to try to get these people in. Apple has reshaped this, right? So their tools let you sign up for Apple Hearing Study, Apple Heart and Movement Study, Apple's Women Health Study. And I remember when they launched this, and this was maybe a year ago now, I think within a month they had something like 800,000 people sign up, right? So it's really a game changer for how we do potentially clinical research and clinical recruiting. Okay, so a few tactics here. And none of these I think are probably surprising, but it's worth talking through them a bit. So how do we get to non-customers? Well, one way to do it, and it depends what size of company you're at, is to ask a friend. And for me, this is perhaps a friend in marketing. Because marketing tends to have budget to do research. Two, they tend to think a lot about non-customers because they know they need to acquire new people right out there. And three, a lot of the times they'll be doing things like brand trackers or non-customer research. And they may not be asking questions necessarily about product, but if you add a couple questions in there to get an aspect of what products do they use now to complete this job, do some jobs to be done research within marketing, you actually get a great alignment within this outreach that can be really powerful in getting some data into your product teams and user research teams. You can start with these soon-to-be non-customers. So this is these people just waiting to jump ship, because you tend to have their email, right? These are people that maybe came and signed up and maybe used you once and never came back again. They maybe seldom use you. Again, it's hard because they're not going to answer your surveys, right? You have to identify them and reach out and probably gives them some incentives to talk to you. But there's a bunch of untapped opportunity with many of these people who maybe have visited your site and not purchased, used your product once and not came back. But a way to identify them is a big opportunity for growth. And sometimes we get this, we're using web and mobile intercepts. So you may be aware of Ethnio or usertesting.com. So Ethnio I love. I haven't used it yet in Europe, but use it a lot in San Francisco. Basically, this is like landing on a homepage here, for example, Airbnb, and it pops up this little piece, a penny for your thoughts, and get a chance to win an Amazon gift certificate. They fill out a short screener, that goes directly to you because you're sitting there in real time and you can call them right away. And sometimes these people, usually they're still on your site and you say, hey, I see you're using our website. Tell me why you're here. Walk me through what you're doing. Walk me through the problems you have and get your feedback. And so you're trying to get at these, 95% of people or 60% of people who may be balanced, or the 25% are only opening up once, that wouldn't necessarily end up in your data, but they are coming to your site and at least they're aware of you, right? So these are the people that are in that soon to be non-customers. Finally, just get out of the building. I mean, the first is just do it. Qualitative feedback doesn't have to be hard. Actually, if you think about it, if we were sitting in a conference room right now, there's probably non-customers all around us. There's far more non-customers out there than customers in the world. And we don't need to leave these talking to just the UX research or marketing team. One of my favorite quotes is, one customer is 100% better than none. And I think the same thing for one non-customer is 100% better than none, in that you reach out to someone and just say, hey, what do you use to solve this problem? Like, do you have this problem, and what products do you use currently? If you use that product, why don't you use our product, right? And of course, there's better ways to ask these questions, but I think you get at the fact by just turning to your left on a bus, when we could write those things, there's lots of non-customers in the world to talk to. We just need to take time to do it, right? It should be easy. There's many, many more of them. So in conclusion, we can revisit this myth. It's hard to find any solid data, but Wald's recommendations were put into effect, and were still being used by the Navy and the Air Force through the Korean Wars and Vietnam Wars. So myth is that the finding may have helped turn the tide of the war. So we don't know what we don't know, and that's okay. We're often blind to why these non-customers fail, yet breakthrough products can come from understanding potential customers who never show up on our dashboards. So to close, I love this quote from Dave McRaney. I'll read. It says, we must remind ourselves that when you start to pick apart the winners and the losers, the successes and the failures, and the living and the dead, that by paying attention to one side of the equation, you're always neglecting the other. Thank you. So before I open up, I just want to send a little shout out to talk a little about AMBOSS. So I'm VP Product Design here at AMBOSS. We're based in Berlin. We have offices in Cologne and New York City, as well as a new office in Sardinia, which is a long story, but should make a remote work much easier in sunny places. And we basically empower all doctors to provide the best possible care, which includes where we started out, which was in online medical schools, right, for helping medical students learn practice for really important exams, and increasingly for doctors for day-to-day reference for clinical decision making. So we're hiring product managers and designers, engineers. Please take a look at AMBOSS.com and reach out to me if you have any interest. Cool. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for the insightful presentation, Chad. And everyone, you're welcome to ask questions now, either verbally or you can write them in Zoom or in the chat of the platform you are watching from. And we will gladly transfer these questions to Chad.
I had one about the ring. Do you have the Oura ring, Chad?
Yeah. I have it here actually. It's quite it's quite interesting because I've actually I mean I have a bit of a fascination with insomnia because I've always had insomnia over the years and tracking, and I've tried about everything out there, even Fitbits, but it has the Fitbit has way too much light going on, and the Oura Ring's an instrument because you just sleep in it and you don't even notice it's there, and then every morning you can wake up and it gives you a bit of a tracking. It's not maybe as accurate, but it's really fascinating because I can walk into if I walk to my doctor and say, hey, I have my sleep tracking for the past 18 months, right? Which includes heart rate and things like this. They have no idea what to do with it, right? They're like, I can't deal with this. Like, it's too much information. But it does feel like there's a missing opportunity there, because usually when you go to the doctors, you see them twice a year, right? You have like 10 minutes. There's this big missing piece right now between all this data we're collecting and trying to make it useful for doctors as well. How about you, Marilla? How long have you had it?
Also about a year and a half. At least for me, it was a good motivation to quit alcohol because I've noticed when you drink alcohol at night, it diminished my REM sleep, and you immediately see it in the metrics.
Yeah.
I also see it when I eat too much or too late at night. It increases the heart rate, and then my overall score is down because like something kept your heart rate up at night. Are you feeling all right, and so on? And then it's like it's kind of this negative gamification. But I found it surprisingly accurate for over-the-shelf product, and I've heard from some people that the Apple Watch is also quite accurate, but then it needs a lot of charging, whereas for this one, I need to charge it every 4 or 5 days. I think in the beginning it was 6 to 7, so it's probably slightly fading. Mohammed wants to jump in and probably stuff that's not a Oura ring. Go ahead.
No, that's interesting. Yeah, I just thanks, Chad, for the presentation. It was very insightful. Like, one thing I'm thinking about now is the way that we look at data, right, where we have data which is available and easy to browse through, and like most of the data that is missing, for example, for like visitors who come and churn away from the website. So I was thinking about the approach for this. So potentially, if we have like 50% of the visitors who come to the website end up churning, maybe not opting in, like things like free trial or registration or providing email or like any kind of consent that we can reach them. How do we go about that? Like, have you thought about, for example, customizing the experience of the website based on like the user intent and what they want to do? Is there a better chance maybe for personalization or something along these lines?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good point. I mean, if you can get at the reasons for why people come and leave, right? I mean, capturing is the first place. It also and I think it also gets at the point of segmentation, right? Like, we tend to segment people a certain way. People tend to segment themselves differently, right? So, ultimately, it gives you an opportunity to say, hey, how do we do landing pages? How do you do more personalization? Potentially to say, hey, I understand you and I understand your need. And marketing to you is maybe different, right? Because you have a different need for my product. So for us, we have this challenge of like, actually, we're trying to serve both medical students as well as physicians. And physicians come to our homepage and they say, well, this is a student's product, it's not for me, right? So ultimately, we need to figure out how do we funnel them down into the right place. And we know that we got that basically by just sitting with, 10, 15 physicians that have no awareness of us, and they didn't know that we were interviewing them to say, hey, you're looking for a tool. Imagine you're looking for this and this website came up. What would you say, right? Ultimately, it's a bit of a qualitative work, but they give feedback to say, look, this is, I think this brand is too student-centric, and you kind of get this type of feedback, and that helps you adapt actually how you talk to people on the website as well too. And those intercepts like Ethnio is also a good path too. I mean, again, if you just pop it up and say, hey, a penny for your thoughts, and don't give them a penny, they may go away because they're not that engaged. But if you do say, hey, here's a chance to win a $500 Amazon certificate, then all of a sudden they may at least fill it out and talk to you too.
I have a question. Thank you, Chad, for the insightful presentation. Just it's quite an open-ended question, but I just wanted to get your input on it. How do you go on about your product discovery, and when do you find out if you should pursue that idea or that feature or not? Like, how do you define it? Because that's kind of a very hard aspect in a lot of product managers' life.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends a little bit on where we try to categorize our products into stages, right? So for example, actually our student education product, we have strong product market fit, and therefore a lot of the discovery goes into how do we get more people in potentially using that and adapting to that. So discovery is a bit more, we know that people are coming in, and it's a little bit about optimizing the experience, right? And therefore we can take lots more experiments. It's a more experimental approach, right? On the other side, where we're looking at kind of clinicians in the United States, we're still looking for product market fit. And that's where actually, in some ways, it's a bit of a different team setup in some ways, meaning, hey, it's potentially a smaller team. Potentially they're shooting lots of bullets until they hit cannonballs, right? And asking lots of questions. And the big challenge there is saying, hey, look, we want to make a decision in 6 weeks whether we should pursue this or not. How do we give you the resources enough to kind of get it forward? So that's one side. On the other side, we do try to do dual track discovery, where we try to have, look, each team, and the teams tend to be around, cross-discipline teams from 7 to 9 people. They usually have one big bet that's in delivery that they're kind of working on around in a 3-month time frame, and then one bet coming up that we know is still kind of in discovery that's kind of coming in the next quarter. And the big challenge there is making sure they can devote enough time to getting both of those pieces, and kind of time boxing some of the things. I think the biggest challenge usually is like, okay, can we make a decision to kill something and move more forward, right? And that is the hardest thing, because if you do discovery, things like to sit around and they really want to move on to the next step. It's kind of like inertia. And that's the biggest thing. So what we tend to have is a couple of stage gates to say, look, we can kill a product or a project, or not kill, or delay a product at any point in these stage gates, from opportunity assessment to initial discovery before it goes in delivery. And the hope is saying, like, look, if everything's moving into delivery, then maybe we're not looking at enough problems. But of course, it's easier said than done. But some of it is being quite clear at which stage you're at, and that, hey, if we're still in discovery, we can still potentially stop this project or decide to de-scope it, and having clear conversations if this is a delivery conversation versus a discovery conversation. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, that's really nicely put. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have also a series of questions from YouTube. One from Ellie Jane, actually 2 from Ellie Jane. One is, why do you have so many offices, particularly in Sardinia? And the second one is, if you could share more about how you conduct qualitative user research, and what are the main questions you ask?
Sure. Offices, so somewhat is historical, like Cologne was where it was started, and then Berlin, moved, I think, for hiring designers and engineers a little bit easier. Our office in New York City is mostly about sales and getting into there. And Sardinia we opened because when the company was smaller, they would still go on kind of retreats and kind of family things to get together in Mallorca and different places. But now that we're 350 people, the goal was saying, hey, actually, let's get an office in a place like Sardinia where people can go for workshops, right? And still get a sense of that community. And especially now that we, in COVID times where we actually say, look, if there's a project there and you have a reason to go, we'll pay for it. But also if people just want to go down there with their family, and live for a month and maybe work for a couple of days or work for a couple of weeks out of that. So it's a bit of our transition a bit into trying to be a bit more virtual first, and we'll see. I think also the CEO really loves Sardinia. So that was one reason. For doing qualitative research, I think it depends which aspect of it. So there's some more usability side, which of course is sitting down with people and just watching them complete tasks, right? Which is a little more straightforward. For the qualitative side, we've built relationships with some hospitals here in Berlin, right? And that is much more kind of going in, shadowing doctors, shadowing physicians, seeing how they do things, doing some one-on-one interviews with them. The hard part was getting in there. Once you're in there, actually people are very open, right? They love to kind of share and they really want to improve that piece. And the questions we ask, I mean, especially for clinical decision making, we try to say, look, what are the questions you ask on a regular basis, right? When do you not have an answer for something? How do you find that answer, right? And it gets quite insightful because actually a lot of times they say, well, if I don't know something, I'll go ask my attending physician, right? Well, what if your attending physician isn't there? What do you do? Well, I go to Google, right? And so these type of questions that follow up to try to say what decisions they're trying to make are a key piece within our qualitative research study. But it's a bit of the classic, like try not to ask too many leading questions. But also the nice thing about doctors and nurses is for the most part, once you get them talking, they tend to have lots of ideas and then it's trying to keep them on track.
Thank you very much. Another question from YouTube from Omer. Can you please give an example of who does AMBOSS consider as non-consumers, since 97% of students use it?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I think, so 97% of students use it, but actually we can, like, what happens is then sometimes when these students become doctors, it becomes less relevant for them sometimes, and then they stop using us. So those are soon to be non-customers. We know if we can continue to capture them, they are then actually a user for lifetime, right? Like their lifetime value goes to age 60 almost, right? So that's one. Refusing non-customers are people that a lot of them actually the times they go to a hospital setting and they have a competitor already paid for, like up to date. It's a bit like showing up at a new office and they already have Microsoft Office and you just have to use it, right? There's a bit of that. The undiscovered non-customers actually might be nurses, right, who didn't go through our program. Or we could say something like end consumers, right? End consumers that have lots of questions about potentially a rare disease. They go to Google, they search for lots of facts, and they may be an option for someone that they don't even know AMBOSS exists because it's more of a medical focused piece. But we may have a lot of content that actually could be really valuable to end consumers as well. So those are a couple of ways of how we view different types of non-consumers for us. And so for us, like actually, if we say, look, nursing is an adjacent innovation, right? It isn't who we've targeted, but we can quite easily potentially move into that non-customer space for an aspect of growth as well.
Great, thank you so much. Another question, this time from Zoom, from Cesar. How would you describe the impact of COVID on the usage of the AMBOSS product? And does this contain some hints about the future of online education? What does the data say?
Yeah, well, of course, it's like for better or for worse, it's been quite good for AMBOSS. Meaning, I think a lot of the universities, right, and even are realizing, hey, we need an online resource to do this. And so COVID is a little bit, I think, of ultimately shaking up the snow globe in a way where these things start to fall, and actually online learning and online collaboration in learning is kind of the new norm. And I think you probably see the same thing in telemedicine, right? Hey, once someone's used telemedicine, they may continue to use it. So COVID has had a really positive impact in strangely way on our business because people that, especially universities that may have never thought about that as much, has now moved to this because they know they need online resources, and thankfully we have a good reputation there. So what the data is saying is we see a lot more new customers coming in, right, than we had, and actually what's also interesting is we actually used to do lots of road shows, like, we go to campuses in the US and have people come and sit with us and sit with a big group and get their friends signed up. And of course, those have moved all over to webinars, and those are working quite well as well. So I think ultimately, there's a couple of industries where COVID will change things. I think it's the same thing we talk about now as we're having this meetup, right? Like, I mean, this used to be mostly probably in an office in Berlin. We'd get maybe 50 people out, maybe 60 people out. And now you realize, hey, we have, an old friend Tanya coming from Boston, right, to this that I would have never had in a meetup in Berlin previously. So I think it's a similar way, kind of shakes up how we think about how we can use our how we connect with people. And the same things happened with AMBOSS.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Another question from Mireke. Overall, how do you prioritize important data from non-customers?
It's a hard question because a lot of it comes down to how you find patterns in that, how you have all these findings, right? And how do you synthesize them and group them? So ultimately, a lot of it comes down to what happens in a small scale in a good brainstorming session, right? You start brainstorming about a topic, you get all these post-it notes up, you then start affinity grouping them, you then start labeling them, and then you start potentially then you have a sense of here's the pains we found, as well as we tend to try to map them across a service blueprint or a user journey map, right? To understand hey, here's what we've seen in this step in the journey. Here's the happy moments. Here's the observations. Here's the pains, and then here's the opportunities. So that gives us at least a mapping across that. Then within that, I think we usually tend to need to do that gives ideas for products, and then you probably need to go out and do a little bit more research to say, hey, of these 10 pains we found, which one is the most important, right? And how do we try to potentially stack rank those even with end customers, saying, hey, of these 10 things, of these 10 problems you want solved, if we can only solve one, what would it be? If we can only solve two, what would it be? It's a similar process I have to run through with our CEO that has 20 ideas and we can only do two, right? In some ways. The other thing is to recognize that, especially with non-customers, a lot of it really is about top of funnel conversion, right? How do you get more people in? How do you acquire them? And how do you get them to activate and eventually adopt your product? And so somewhat says, hey, is the size of the market, how many people are we going to get in, and could we activate them in a certain way? So it comes down a little bit to some traditional metrics, but it's not an easy process because it can be kind of messy as you start talking to non-customers. That said, sometimes it's quite obvious. There's just a pain there that you can service really well, and you can put up right away even landing pages that have value props that get them into your product quite quickly.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. And many thanks from our viewers, Alexander, Letty, Omer, and also a new question from Co-Cave. So thank you very much for the presentation. Do you have a tip for designers to integrate data into the design process? Like what kind of skills or topics to consider?
Sure. I think that what I've seen, a great way for designers to include data is to think about user journey maps as a starting point. So for example, we have a mid-level designer here that was working on basically our e-commerce platform, right? And most of these platforms we have are types of funnels, right? But if you just take one aspect of it, saying, hey, what is a user journey from I click a button to potentially sign up, I go through a profile completion process, I then put my credit card in and go out. So this gives you an end-to-end journey that includes 5 or 6 steps. And the great thing about that journey is then you work with your product analyst and you can start mapping usually abandonment rate or conversion rates across those, right? Like, hey, people are coming to this page. How many people go out to how many people bounce? How many go out to a different place? How many people continue this next step? And I think that is usually really helpful, especially if you're a designer within a team. It up-levels everybody to think about not just about this button in front of you, but actually that overall user journey and the funnel that people are a part of. That's one way. The other thing is to identify, hey, if you have this flywheel that happens between I'm evaluating a product, right? And maybe I'm acquired, then I'm adopting your product and getting useful. And then I'm actually a regular user, right? And then I become an evangelist for your product. And then hopefully I tell other people about it. So if you think about where in that life cycle of a user, a happy path, your product fits, it helps you identify and work with your product manager to say, hey, what are the 1 or 2 key metrics that we're trying to improve here, right? And usually it comes down to 2 things. It's really either acquisition, like getting more people on the top, or it's about retention and lifetime value, meaning getting people to stay and continue paying. Most everything maps up to those two key metrics at the top. So it's worth asking the questions as a designer, what is the key metric we're trying to measure? How do we measure that? And how does that loop back up to the broader business metrics, usually of customer lifetime value or conversion rate?
Great, thank you very much. And another question. How can we...
No, sorry. I wanted to ask
please.
a question, but sorry. No, sorry.
Yes.
No, please.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I'm just thinking about finding product market fit, and you mentioned the US market, where we know that there are many providers and many insurers, unlike European countries where the state controls at least partially part of the process. So it's a little bit easier to actually plan in terms of acquiring customers, because we have large insurers and also seamlessly trying to establish a payment process, while the US has a completely different market. So I'm just wondering, how do you factor these system level elements into the research and design process in terms of understanding, for example, what are the needs of the physicians in one clinic, and trying to somehow level that up and understand how to integrate that with what you know about how the whole system works that might be different from that particular clinic or hospital. So that's one question, and there is another, but I will say in a bit.
Sure. And it's really hard, I think, and I think lots of people on the call have worked in healthcare. And now that I've worked in some of the US and in the UK and in Germany, they're all really different. I think it's a really hard thing because you have, of course, if in traditional startups and many things like, hey, we have a product and product might fit, people will buy it, right? And that works. And of course, in healthcare, you have the payer and the provider and the patient have to sync up, right? And this is, for me, was really frustrating with insomnia because you couldn't get this to sync up. So that's one, meaning it's not easy. Two, as we look to the United States, we are starting with a couple of things happen. One, we do have a lot of doctors on staff because we have a lot of editorial work and medical editorial work who have previously been either students or physicians. So that's one thing. So at least we have around 130, I think, people in our medical team. So we have people on staff we can talk to get insights about how they use it. We then also have been building out kind of a residency program that have around 200 residents that, again, use us as students that are now practicing, that we can go to and talk about and meet with them about their own personal experience. We also tend to then have like a medical advisory board that are, people that are actually that are on the boards and are actually in the clinics doing that we ask. And the final thing is right now we're still doing a lot of just market research, right? This isn't user research. It's like looking at the competitive landscape, who's using what, in which scenario, who's paying for much, how much do they pay, what are opportunities for differentiation, like what are the problems we're solving, and where might we fit within that, as well as kind of broadening out to say, hey, it's not just hospitals, it's actually things like we call it like doctor in the box, these CVS clinics that are kind of a new piece in that. So in some ways, for us at least, we have a little bit of a luxury, right or wrong, to say, look, I mean, so for example, we have our user research and market research team is around 8 people. It's almost even bigger than our design team, partially because we know that we need to do market research and user research within the German market and the US market. So a long way of saying, in some ways, we've said, look, we need to invest in this, and we need to have people doing that kind of level of desk research, as well as surveys, as well as then talking with people, and hopefully that kind of calibrates into an aspect. The other thing is, it's unique, is different from us, is we tend to have lots of doctors and students that just pay for us out of pocket. It's like, hey, it's $9 a month. They kind of view it as something like, hey, it's my textbook. I would have bought this anyway. And so it's a bit in some ways like Slack, where like, hey, you have lots of engineers first buying it. And then when you get 25% of people buying it, you go to the enterprise people and say, hey, now we have people using it. So ultimately, we were a bit easier for us, partially because the students that then grow organically into physicians in that way.
Okay. That's actually quite interesting. The other question is about the methods. So actually, I'm building my UX research career, and I come from marketing background. So I'm quite interested in the methods that you use. For example, one of your customer base is the students, and there is a lot of data out there and also ethnographic research about online learning that might not necessarily be about medical products particularly. So I'm curious if you do actually run this sort of parallel research or data analysis where you try to extrapolate some insights from different industries but might apply to your product. Or for example, you go for developing a feature or designing a feature and trying to test that out and see if you can actually hit the target that you are trying to reach, or any other method that you would like to share.
Yeah, I do think.
Can I
Oh,
first
go ahead,
highlight,
Anna.
please,
Yes.
that we should soon wrap up and
Okay.
continue with the networking session.
Okay, cool. So should I go ahead and answer, Anna, then? Or?
Well, yes, I think a quick answer. And Salva, will you be staying for the networking session? Then we could.
Yes.
Perfectly. Okay, then thank you very much, Chad, for sharing these insights with us. It was very interesting and eye-opening. And thank you for highlighting the importance of non-consumers, non-customers. And thank you, everyone, for all your questions and for participating and being together with us. And you're also kindly invited now to join us on Zoom. We will start the informal networking event. And we also invite everyone to our next week's event when we will talk about driving product strategy using the famous North Star with our guest speaker from Just Met. So see you soon, everyone. See you on Zoom and take care.